Hello, my favorite listener. You found Rust Belt Studios, home to the Into the Dark of the Woods, Mikey and the Garden Arch, and the Engine of War. These stories take time, and a little bit of help keeps the lights on in the studio, which is just a fancy way of saying the spare room in our house. You can tap on the Acast supporter link in the show notes, or join us on Patreon for early access, bonus episodes, and a few secrets we don't share anywhere else. For now, though, settle in. The story's about to start. The frost came early that morning, slicking the fields with silver. Pumpkins sat in rows like fat lanterns, their skins shining where the sun caught them. Some leaned into each other, shoulders pressed like gossiping neighbors. Others stood alone, their stems bent like tired necks. The Callio farm had more pumpkins than any patch in Iron Bay, more than anyone else in the county. Some years it seemed like more than the whole Upper Peninsula. Eero Callio walked the rows in his worn boots, hands tucked into pockets of his flannel. Mid-40s, hair already salted gray, his shoulders are broad from years of lifting what the ground gave him. He carried himself like a man who belonged on this land, because he did. His father had walked the same rows, and his father before him, generations deep. Most of the vegetables were already taken down for seed, potatoes in burlap sacks, onions in mesh bags, cabbages stacked in bins near the shed. But pumpkins were the Callio name. Callio pumpkins turned up at cider mills near Traverse City, at farm stands outside Detroit, even in photos clipped from Lansing newspapers. Other farms grew pumpkins too, but none carried the same weight. The Callios were known for it, as if the family and the crop were the same word. Anya was crouched between two rows, sketching a face on a small gourd with a felt marker. She had a line of them arranged on a wooden crate, wide grins, sharp teeth, a scarecrow's stitched mouth. She worked fast, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Early 20s, dark hair pulled back, she moved with the confidence of someone who had grown up in dirt and dust. Her parents had moved away years ago, Marquette for work, but she'd stayed. Or, maybe more truthfully, she just hadn't wanted to leave. The farm felt like hers as much as Eero's, though she never said it. She was too busy proving it every day, out in the rows before sunup, hauling as many sacks of potatoes as he did, drawing faces on gourds when the work slowed. "You'll run through all the markers," Eero said, his voice low, not even pretending to scold. Anya glanced up. "They sell cheap at Ranta's." She drew another set of eyes, big and round, then leaned back to judge the effect. "Besides, these'll go at the stand." Eero grunted. He looked down the line of pumpkins, each one squat and heavy, waiting for him to make decisions. Too many for the stand. Too many even for the town festivals. Some would get hauled to Escanaba in the pickup, some would head further south, packed into trucks and sent to markets across the state. He marked that in his head, quiet math as he carried every October. The dog barked from the porch, an old collie with stiff legs, more noise than bite these days. A crow rose from the fence post, black wings cutting against the pale sky, then dropped into the field 2 rows over. Eero watched it longer than he needed to. Behind him, Anya stacked her painted gourds and stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Truck's got to be loaded tonight if we're taking it in tomorrow. You want me to start?" He nodded. "Crates first, pumpkins after." She headed toward the shed, and he followed more slowly, pausing once at the edge of the patch. His breath showed in front of him, steaming in the cold, and for a moment he just looked at the rows, their sheer weight, the orange mass of them. He rubbed his thumb over the callus in his palm, then drew his hand back into his pocket. At the shed, Anya had already stacked 2 crates in the truck bed. She worked quick, efficient, muscles moving without wasted motion. He joined in, hefting pumpkins one by one, setting them in neat lines so they wouldn't roll on the road. By the time the sun dipped toward the tree line, the truck was half loaded, its suspension already sagging. They stopped when the light got thin. Anya stretched, hands on her hips, eyes on the truck. "Think that'll do for the first run, Uncle?" "It'll do." They stood for a while without speaking. The fields lay behind them, stripped and waiting. The truck stood in front of them, heavy with the work of the day, and tomorrow it would be to town, the co-op, greetings, the pie bake. Tonight it was just the farm. When Anya finally went inside, Eero stayed a minute longer. He walked back to the edge of the pumpkin rows. The frost was already setting again, dusting the vines in white. He crouched and touched the stem of one of the larger pumpkins, feeling the cold through his glove. Then he straightened, looked once at the calendar page he had pinned near the shed door, October 23rd circled, and went inside without a word. The next morning started clear, sky pale blue with a thin sweep of clouds to the west. Eero backed the pickup down the long drive, the bed stacked with crates of potatoes, cabbages, and pumpkins. Anya rode beside him, her hair pulled into a messy braid, a thermos of coffee wedged between her knees. The collie barked once from the porch, too stiff to chase them anymore, and the farm shrank behind them as they rolled toward Iron Bay. Tires hummed on the frost-hardened road. Main Street already looked like a postcard. Corn stalks lashed to lampposts, hay bales stacked at corners, orange bunting strung between second-story windows. The plate glass fronts of Ranta's Hardware and Nelson's Market were painted with big looping pumpkins, scarecrows, and black cats. The whole town had dressed for the week. Eero pulled up to the co-op dock. A couple of other trucks were already there, men unloading crates of apples and squash. The Callio load drew glances, no surprises there. Everyone knew their pumpkins, and he killed the engine and stepped out, the air sharp in his lungs. "Morning, Eero." The co-op manager, Mrs. Lantian, came down the ramp in her quilted vest. "That's a fine load you've got." "Morning," he said. He tipped his cap. Anya hopped out and swung the tailgate open, and together they started unloading and stacking crates in neat lines. A boy from the high school came over to help, all elbows and eagerness. He looked at the pumpkins like he was handling gold. "Careful with that one," Anya had said, steadying a crate. "They bruise easy." "Yes, ma'am." The boy flushed, adjusting his grip, and by the time the last crate was stacked, more townsfolk had drifted by, offering waves and greetings. It was always like that when the Callio truck rolled in. They weren't celebrities, just farmers, but pumpkins meant something here, and Callio pumpkins meant more. From the co-op, they drove the short block to the church hall. The parking lot was half full already, women in sweaters carrying pie tins through the doors. The pie bake was one of the early festival anchors, more social than competition, though the local paper always listed winners. Inside, the hall smelled of cinnamon and sugar, butter and coffee. Long tables covered in vinyl cloth stretched across the room. Pies lined the counters, apple, pumpkin, pecan, blueberry. Lattice tops, crimped edges, sugar dusted across the crusts. The sound of voices filled the space, layered like music. Anya balanced two of their own pies, pumpkin of course, and set them carefully on the growing display. She leaned in to whisper, "We're not winning. Mrs. Ranta's already got 3 lined up." Eero glanced over. Mrs. Ranta, round and cheerful, was laughing with a group of women near the coffee urn. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Not to you." Anya wiped her hands on her jeans. It does to her." They moved through the crowd, shaking hands, nodding at greetings. Everyone knew them. The Callio farm wasn't the biggest in acreage, but it was the one people talked about when they talked about the pumpkins in this time of year. "Eero! Anya!" A man in a plaid blazer waved them over. It was the editor of the Iron Bay Gazette, notebook already open. "Tell me you've got entries for the carving this year." "Not yet," Anya said with a grin. "But we'll have some pumpkins set aside for people to use." Good. We need you in the contest. Town wouldn't be the same without Callio pumpkins out front." Eero smiled but said nothing. His eyes drifted past the editor to a bulletin board near the door. A flyer tacked there in bright orange letters listed the week events. October 24th, pie bake. October 26th, corn maze at the ball field. October 28th, festival parade. October 29th, church social. October 31st, pumpkin carving and judging. He stood a moment too long reading the bold 31 twice until Anya tugged at his sleeve. Uncle? He blinked, nodded, followed her back into the swirl of voices. At the far end of the hall, Connie from the copper ladle was serving coffee. She winked at Anya. I hear you're decorating the stand again this year. You'll put the rest of us to shame. Just painting gourds, Anya said, laughing. Nothing fancy. Fancy enough, Connie said. Anya beamed and Eero took a cup without comment. They lingered for another hour, tasting pies, trading small talk. Eero kept to the edges, watching. Kids ran past with whipped cream on their cheeks. A man tuned a guitar near the stage, strumming softly. The whole town seemed gathered in one room, warm and noisy, as if nothing bad could ever settle here. When they finally stepped back outside, the light was thinning and the pickup sat heavy in the lot, half empty now, but still solid with the smell of pumpkins. Anya tucked the festival flyer under the sun visor. Whole week ahead, she said cheerfully. Eero started the engine. He looked once down Main Street, where the decorations rattled faintly in the wind. Then he turned the truck, made one more stop to unload the rest of their goods, and started to home. The road back to the farm was quiet, fields darkening, cedar shadows long. Anya dozed against the window, and Eero drove steady, hands fixed at 10 and 2. His eyes kept slipping to the calendar in his mind, the dates lined up like rows of pumpkins. 24 today, 31 waiting at the end, bold and black. He kept his face still and said nothing. The next morning came in gray clouds dragging low across the ridge, and the field smelled of damp earth and straw, a heavy smell that clung to boots and coats. Eero was up before the dog barked, pulling on his jacket while the house was still dark. The kitchen clock ticked slow, its second hand louder than usual, making out the day, October 25th. He stepped outside with a pail in hand. The barn doors groaned open, hinges stiff with cold. The cattle shifted at the sound, steaming in the air. He moved down the line with quiet efficiency, grain in troughs, fresh hay pulled from the loft, water broken with the edge of a stick where the top had iced overnight. The rhythm of it was familiar, bone deep, feed, sweep, check, move on. By the time Anya came out, shrugging into her coat, he was already halfway through the chores, and she carried a basket of feed for the hens, calling to them as she scattered the grain. They came at her in a rush of feathers, clucking and flapping, their noise sharp against the morning. Got 2 eggs this time, she called, holding them up. The rest of them are just being stingy. Cold snap will do that, Eero said. He pushed the barn doors wide and walked out into the field, and the soil was firm under his boots, the kind that stuck to itself in clods. They moved along the potato rows, pulling the last of them free. Each one thumped into a burlap sack, the pile growing steady. Pumpkins waited in neat stacks at the edge of the patch, their skins dull from the gray light. He continued without thinking, lips pressed tight, and Anya worked close beside him, humming under her breath. She had brought out a basket of more small gourds and a tin of paints. When the digging slowed, she settled on an overturned crate and began sketching with a brush. Reds and yellows spread across the pale gourds, swirls and leaf patterns, faces with long curling eyelashes. She leaned close, hair falling across her cheek, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. They'll sell quick, she said without looking up. People want color at their table. He nodded, hefted another sack of potatoes. Keep at it, then. She grinned, flicking a streak of paint across the curve of a gourd, her hand moving fast, sure, as if she were drawing straight out of her head with no pause in between. A little line of finished gourds grew beside her, bright against the dull day, and by noon the work had slowed. They carried the sacks to the truck, stacked them beside the pumpkins still waiting from yesterday. The bed sat heavy, tires sinking slightly into the ruts in the yard, Inside, the kitchen smelled of bread and onions. Anya set the gourds on the counter to dry, wiped her hands on a rag, and she talked as she moved, plans for decorating the stand, who might stop by the farm that week, which of her friends would be back from Marquette for the parade. Eero listened, chewing in silence, eyes drifting to the calendar nailed beside the stove. The 25th already crossed out, neat black line through the number. He set his fork down and stood. The house creaked as he climbed the stairs, and his boots left faint mud prints on the runner, marks he didn't notice. In his room, the air was cooler, the curtains pulled against the weak light. He knelt beside the bed, reached underneath until his hands found an old box. He slid it out, sat on the floor with it balanced on his knees. Inside lay the family's private account, an album of sorts. Newspaper clippings folded and yellowing, photographs cut from magazines, scraps of paper with scribbled notes. Headlines about pumpkin harvests, festival winners, record weights, mentions of the Calio name in towns all across Michigan, Lansing, Grand Rapids, even Detroit. Each clipping tucked in place as though it mattered, as though it proved something. He turned a page and found his father's handwriting in the margins, dates, weights, short notes in Finnish and English. Before that, older entries, tighter script, different hands. Generations had kept this, though no one outside the family knew it existed. The album smelled of dust and ink, and he closed it carefully, slid it back into the box, then back under the bed. His hands lingered there for a moment, fingertips pressed to the wood frame before he stood. Downstairs, Anya had already gone back outside. He found her near the stand, arranging her painted gourds in a line across the counter. Customers would see them first thing when they pulled off the road, bright little faces to catch the eye. She turned one so the design faced forward, then stepped back, satisfied. "You do think they'll sell?" she asked. "They'll sell," he said. She smiled and went back to fussing with the arrangement, and evening settled in slow. The sky deepened to steel clouds closing in, and Eero checked the fences one last time, his lantern swinging from his hand. The cattle stood quiet, chewing, and the pumpkins glowed faintly in the barn's shadow, a line of orange shapes against the dark. He touched one in passing, palm flat against the cool skin, then pulled his hand back quick as if caught. Inside, Anya turned on the lights and the kitchen glowed. She was already talking about tomorrow, about what still needed to be picked and what to load for the market. Eero nodded, answered where he had to, but mostly kept his eyes on the window. The dark pressed close to the glass. He could see his reflection there, faint and thin, doubled against the night. He looked away, sat down, folded his hands on the table. The album stayed under the bed upstairs, hidden. The pumpkins stayed outside waiting, and Eero kept his silence. Hello again. Thanks for spending time in Into the Dark of the Woods with us. This story was written and performed by Brian Foster and is a product of Rust Belt Studio. You can find more stories, Mikey and the Garden Arch, or Engine of War, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you'd like to help keep the lights on, join us on Patreon. It costs less than a hot and ready from Little Caesars, and it keeps the gears turning. However you got here, we appreciate it, and until next time, my favorite listener.